You and your Pentagon friends deceived America. When Tulsi Gabbard's voice rang through the studio, Kash Patel's confident expression changed. But then what he said would have the entire country talking. The Fox News studio lights blazed with an intensity that matched the political fire about to ignite between two of America's most controversial national security figures. It was a cold November evening in 2025, and what was supposed to be a routine discussion about intelligence oversight was about to become the most explosive revelation in Pentagon history. Tulsi Gabbard, 43, sat poised in her crisp white blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, eyes sharp with the kind of determination that had made her one of the most feared questioners during her time in Congress. Across from her, Kash Patel, 45, adjusted his burgundy tie with the confident precision of someone who had spent years in the highest levels of national security. His dark hair perfectly styled, expression radiating the authority that came from being Trump's most trusted intelligence operative. The moderator, Fox News anchor Brett Baer, had introduced this as a discussion about intelligence reform and government accountability, but everyone in that studio sensed they were about to witness something far more explosive. The audience of 150 invited guests represented the heart of conservative America: military veterans, intelligence community alumni, national security hawks, and political insiders who live for moments like this. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation as the hashtag Tulsi versus Kash began trending before the debate even officially started. What none of them knew was that Tulsi had spent months investigating something that would shake the intelligence community to its core. Hidden in her briefcase was evidence so damaging it would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the Pentagon, a cover-up so massive it would force America to question everything it thought it knew about its national security apparatus. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the explosive political drama we cover. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. This wasn't just another political debate. This was the moment when America's intelligence establishment collided with one of its most persistent critics, live on national television. Kash Patel had spent the weeks leading up to this debate positioning himself as the ultimate guardian of American national security. As Trump's former chief of staff at the Department of Defense and one-time nominee to lead the FBI, Patel had cultivated an image as the intelligence community's most effective reformer. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had been in the room where life and death decisions were made, where classified operations were planned, where America's enemies were identified and neutralized. Patel's supporters saw him as the ultimate patriot, an Indian American who had risen through the ranks of the intelligence community through sheer merit and unwavering loyalty to America. His resume was impressive: prosecutor, National Security Council Senior Director, House Intelligence Committee investigator, and senior Pentagon official. He had been instrumental in exposing what Trump called the deep state conspiracy against his presidency, and conservative media had lionized him as one of the few intelligence officials willing to put America first. But Kash Patel harbored secrets that went far deeper than his public persona suggested. Behind his carefully crafted image as a reformer lay a man who had been part of some of the intelligence community's most questionable operations, decisions that prioritized political loyalty over national security, cover-ups that protected the powerful at the expense of the truth. Tonight, those secrets would be exposed in the most public way possible. Tulsi Gabbard represented everything the establishment intelligence community feared: an outsider who asked uncomfortable questions. Born in American Samoa and raised in Hawaii, she had served as a medical corps officer in the Army National Guard, deploying twice to the Middle East. Her military service had given her first-hand knowledge of how intelligence failures and political manipulation could cost American lives. At 43, she was young enough to represent a new generation of national security thinking, but experienced enough to understand how the system really worked. Tulsi's journey from rising Democratic star to independent voice had been marked by her willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. Her criticism of regime change wars, her questions about intelligence community overreach, and her demand for transparency had made her enemies in both parties. After leaving Congress in 2021, she had become one of the most effective critics of what she called the permanent war establishment. What made Tulsi particularly dangerous to figures like Kash Patel was her combination of military experience, congressional oversight background, and complete independence from partisan loyalty. She had the credentials to ask tough questions and the platform to demand answers. Tonight, she would use both to devastating effect. The stage was set for more than just a policy debate. This was a collision between two visions of American national security: Patel's insider approach that prioritized loyalty and hierarchy versus Tulsi's outsider perspective that demanded transparency and accountability. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. The ultimate intelligence community insider against its most persistent critic. As the cameras rolled and Bret Baier welcomed viewers to what he called a crucial conversation about America's intelligence future, neither Kash Patel nor Tulsi Gabbard could have anticipated that this night would become one of the most talked about national security moments of the decade. The evidence in Tulsi's briefcase was about to change everything. Bret Baier opened the segment with what seemed like a straightforward question about intelligence oversight, but the tension between the two participants was immediately apparent. Kash Patel, confident in his insider knowledge and establishment support, launched into a familiar defense of the intelligence community's recent reforms under Trump's leadership. His voice carried the authority of someone who had been briefed on the nation's most classified programs, discussing national security as if it were a chess game where only the initiated could understand the moves. The reality that critics like Tulsi Gabbard refused to acknowledge. Patel began, his tone carrying just enough condescension to set the tone for what was coming, is that the intelligence community has undergone unprecedented reform in recent years. We've rooted out the bad actors, we've implemented new oversight mechanisms, and we've restored integrity to our national security apparatus. The conservative audience nodded appreciatively. This was the message they had come to hear, that the intelligence community had been cleaned up, that the deep state conspiracy had been defeated, that America's national security was in good hands. Patel continued, his confidence growing with each word. What Tulsi and other critics don't understand is the complexity of intelligence work. They see shadows where there are none, conspiracies where there are legitimate operations, cover-ups where there are necessary classifications to protect sources and methods. His voice took on an edge that suggested he was building towards something more personal. It's easy to criticize from the outside when you've never had to make the hard decisions, when you've never had to balance transparency with operational security, when you've never had to protect assets whose lives depend on secrecy. Tulsi listened intently, her expression calm, but her eyes showing the kind of focused intensity that had made her famous during congressional hearings. She had faced this type of dismissal countless times before, the suggestion that her military service somehow didn't qualify her to question intelligence operations, the implication that criticism of the intelligence community was inherently unpatriotic. When Baier turned to her for a response, Tulsi leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made everyone in the studio pay attention. "Kash, it's interesting that you mentioned protecting sources and methods," she began, her tone deceptively measured, "because I think the American people deserve to know exactly what sources and methods you've been protecting and whose interests you've really been serving." Patel's confident smile flickered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. "By all means, Tulsi, let's talk about serving American interests. My record speaks for itself." "Does it?" Tulsi's voice sharpened. "Because when I look at your record, I see a pattern of prioritizing political loyalty over national security, of protecting powerful people instead of protecting the country, of covering up failures instead of learning from them." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This was moving beyond policy discussion into personal territory, and the temperature in the room was rising noticeably. Patel's face reddened slightly, but his years of media training kicked in. "That's exactly the kind of irresponsible accusation that undermines public trust in our intelligence agencies," he responded, his voice rising. "You're making sweeping allegations without evidence, spreading conspiracy theories that damage our national security." Without evidence? Tulsi's eyebrow raised, and something in her tone suggested Patel had just made a serious mistake. Kash, before we continue this conversation about who's damaging national security, I think this audience needs to see something. She reached for her briefcase, and the atmosphere in the studio immediately changed. Patel's expression shifted from confident to wary as Tulsi pulled out a thick folder filled with documents. These are declassified documents from the Pentagon Inspector General's office, she said, her voice cutting through the sudden silence. I think they're very relevant to our discussion about intelligence community, reform, and accountability. Patel's face went pale. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice losing its earlier authority. "I'm about to show this audience exactly what kind of reform you've been implementing," Tulsi replied, opening the folder. "And I think everyone watching deserves to know the truth about Operation Crossfire Hurricane's aftermath." The studio fell completely silent. Even Brett Baer looked surprised by this unexpected turn. The cameras zoomed in on both participants. Patel's face a mixture of panic and anger, Tulsi's expression calm but determined. "These documents detail a systematic cover-up that you orchestrated while serving as Defense Department Chief of Staff," Tulsi continued, pulling out several pages marked with official Pentagon letterheads. "A cover-up designed to protect political allies while throwing career intelligence officers under the bus." She held up the first document. "This is Internal Memo 2024-0847, dated March 15, 2024. It details how you personally intervened to prevent the release of an Inspector General report that would have exposed serious misconduct by senior Trump administration officials." The audience was riveted now, many leaning forward in their seats. This wasn't the policy debate they had expected. This was a real-time exposure of alleged intelligence community corruption. Patel attempted to respond, but his voice cracked slightly. "Those documents are taken out of context. National security requires difficult decisions that civilians don't understand." "Civilians?" Tulsi's voice carried a dangerous edge now. "Kash, I served 2 combat deployments. I've seen what happens when intelligence failures cost American lives. Don't you dare suggest that I don't understand national security." She pulled out another document. "This is even more interesting. Pentagon email chain 2024-0923, showing communications between you and White House Chief of Staff regarding the suppression of intelligence about Russian election interference." The studio erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. This was moving into territory that could have massive implications for American democracy. "The email shows you actively work to prevent intelligence about ongoing Russian operations from reaching congressional oversight committees," Tulsi continued, her voice steady despite the explosive nature of what she was revealing. "You prioritized protecting the Trump administration's narrative over protecting American elections." Patel's composure was cracking visibly now. The confident intelligence professional who had entered the studio was being replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened by what was being exposed. "This is a political hit job," he managed to say, his voice lacking any of its earlier authority. "You're taking classified information out of context to serve your own agenda." "Classified?" Tulsi held up the documents. "Kash, these are all declassified. The Pentagon Inspector General released them last month. The only reason more people don't know about them is because mainstream media has been reluctant to report on intelligence community misconduct." She turned to face the cameras directly, speaking not just to the studio audience, but to the millions watching at home. "What we're seeing here is exactly what's wrong with our intelligence agencies. We have officials like Kash who treat national security as a political game, who prioritize protecting powerful people over protecting the country, who use classification and secrecy to hide their own misconduct." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. The American people deserve to know that while Kash talks about reform and accountability, he was actively working to cover up intelligence failures, suppress information about foreign election interference, and retaliate against whistleblowers who tried to do the right thing. She pulled out yet another document. "This is Personnel Action Report 2024-1156. It shows how you use your position to have 3 career intelligence analysts transferred to dead-end positions after they raised concerns about the suppression of the Russian interference intelligence. The revelations were coming fast now, each one more damaging than the last. Patel sat frozen in his chair, clearly unprepared for this level of detailed exposure. These weren't political appointees, Kash. These were career professionals with decades of experience. People who had dedicated their lives to protecting America, and you destroyed their careers because they threatened your political narrative. Tulsi's voice was building with controlled anger now. One of those analysts, Sarah Chun, had been tracking Russian disinformation campaigns for 15 years. She identified a major operation targeting the 2024 elections. When she tried to brief congressional leadership, you blocked her access and had her reassigned to a basement office in the Pentagon. The specificity of the allegations was devastating. These weren't vague conspiracy theories. These were detailed accusations backed by official documents. Patel finally found his voice, but it was weak and defensive. Intelligence work requires protecting sources and methods. Sometimes analysts don't understand the bigger picture. The bigger picture? Tulsi's voice rose. The bigger picture was that Sarah Chin's intelligence could have helped protect American democracy. But you buried it because it was politically inconvenient for your boss. She held up another document. This is the intelligence report that Chun tried to deliver. It details a sophisticated Russian operation to manipulate social media in swing states during the 2024 election. The operation was ongoing when you suppressed this report. The implications were staggering. The audience was beginning to understand that they weren't just witnessing a political debate, they were learning about a potential conspiracy to hide foreign election interference. How many American voters were manipulated by Russian disinformation because you decided to protect Donald Trump's feelings instead of protecting American democracy? Tulsi asked, her voice cutting through the studio like a knife. Patel's response was barely audible. That's not what happened. Isn't it? Tulsi pulled out the final document. This is your own email, sent to the White House Chief of Staff on March 20th, 2024. You wrote, and I quote, "We cannot allow the Chun report to reach Congress before the election. The political fallout would be devastating. We need to find a way to bury this until after November." The studio erupted. Even conservative audience members who had come to support Patel looked shocked and betrayed. The idea that intelligence about foreign election interference had been suppressed for political reasons was beyond anything they had imagined. Tulsi stood up now, her presence commanding the entire studio. This is what we're fighting against in American intelligence. Not just incompetence, not just bureaucratic failures, but active corruption. Officials who treat national security as a political weapon rather than a sacred trust. She turned back to Patel, who was slumped in his chair, looking like a man whose entire world had just collapsed. You want to talk about protecting America, Kash? You want to talk about integrity and reform? You actively worked to hide information about foreign attacks on our democracy. You destroyed the careers of patriotic Americans who tried to do their jobs. You put partisan politics ahead of national security. The cameras caught the faces of individual audience members, veterans who looked betrayed, intelligence community retirees who appeared stunned, conservative voters who seemed to be questioning everything they thought they knew about their heroes. The worst part, Tulsi continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of her military service and congressional experience, is that you're still lying about it. Even now, caught red-handed with your own emails and documents, you're trying to spin this as legitimate intelligence work. She gestured toward the audience. These people trusted you. They believed you when you said you were reforming the intelligence community, when you claimed you were putting America first. But you were actually doing the opposite, putting partisan politics first and America last. The contrast was stark and devastating. Here was Tulsi, a veteran who had served in combat zones, exposing the misconduct of someone who had never worn the uniform but had sent others to fight while playing political games with their intelligence. You want to know the difference between us, Kash? Tulsi asked, her voice steady but powerful. I've actually put my life on the line for this country. I've served in places where intelligence failures mean American soldiers die. You've served in offices where intelligence failures mean political embarrassment. She paused, letting her words sink in. I became a member of Congress to provide oversight of agencies like the Pentagon because I know what happens when the intelligence community operates without accountability. You joined the Pentagon to protect your political patrons from that oversight. The audience was completely silent now, many looking genuinely shaken by what they had learned. Brett Baer, professional journalist that he was, attempted to give Patel one final chance to respond. Kash, these are serious allegations about your conduct and your priorities. How do you respond? Patel's answer was telling in its desperation. This is all taken out of context, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Intelligence work is complex. There are reasons for these decisions that I can't discuss publicly. Can't discuss publicly? Tulsi's voice carried a note of incredulity. Kash, we're not talking about operational details or sources and methods. We're talking about your decision to suppress intelligence about foreign attacks on American democracy for partisan political reasons. She held up the documents again. These aren't state secrets. These are documented examples of misconduct, corruption, and the politicization of intelligence. The only reason you can't discuss them publicly is because they expose you as exactly the kind of person who should never be trusted with national security responsibilities. The final exchange crystallized everything wrong with America's intelligence establishment. Here was a man who had reached the highest levels of national security leadership not through competence or integrity, but through political loyalty. When faced with evidence of his misconduct, his only defense was to hide behind the same classification system he had abused. As the segment officially ended, Patel gathered his materials quickly, clearly wanting to escape as fast as possible. Gone was the confident intelligence professional who had entered the studio, replaced by someone who looked genuinely defeated by his own exposed words and actions. Tulsi, meanwhile, remained calm and composed, accepting questions from audience members who approached her after the cameras stopped rolling. Her performance had been masterful. She had used Patel's own documents and emails to expose a pattern of corruption that went to the heart of America's intelligence community. The immediate aftermath was unlike anything Fox News had ever experienced. Social media exploded with clips of Tulsi's document presentation, reaction videos, and analysis of what this meant for intelligence community accountability. Hashtag Patel Exposed began trending within minutes, followed quickly by hashtag intelligence corruption and hashtag Tulsi wins. Conservative commentators struggled to defend Patel, with many simply refusing to address the substance of the documents Tulsi had presented. Some attempted to claim they were fake, but Pentagon officials quickly confirmed their authenticity. Others tried to argue that suppressing intelligence was sometimes necessary, but that argument fell flat given the clear political motivations revealed in Patel's own emails. Intelligence community veterans were divided in their responses. Some defended Patel as a loyal official who had made tough decisions, but many others expressed horror at the idea that intelligence about foreign election interference had been suppressed for political reasons. Perhaps most importantly, the exposure sparked a broader conversation about accountability in America's intelligence agencies. The documents Tulsi had presented weren't just evidence of individual misconduct. They revealed systemic problems with how intelligence was being politicized at the highest levels. Within 24 hours, multiple congressional committees announced investigations into the suppression of the Russian election interference intelligence. The career analysts who had been retaliated against, including Sarah Chun, were contacted by whistleblower protection organizations and congressional oversight staff. Kash Patel attempted damage control with a carefully crafted statement released through his lawyer. The documents presented by Tulsi Gabbard were taken completely out of context and misrepresent legitimate intelligence community decisions made to protect national security. Ms. Gabbard's political motivations are clear, and her selective presentation of classified information represents exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior that undermines public trust in our intelligence agencies. But the damage was done. The documents were too clear, too specific, and too well documented to be dismissed as taken out of context. Patel's own emails provided the context. and that context made his actions look even worse. Tulsi's response to Patel's statement was swift and devastating. Kash's statement proves my point perfectly. When confronted with evidence of misconduct, his first instinct is to attack the messenger rather than address the message. This is exactly the kind of deflection and dishonesty that has corrupted our intelligence community. She continued, "The American people deserve intelligence leaders whose first loyalty is to the Constitution and the truth, not to partisan political figures." What we saw in those documents was a clear pattern of prioritizing political loyalty over national security, and that's completely unacceptable. The broader implications of the confrontation extended far beyond the two participants. The documents had exposed something that intelligence experts had long suspected but rarely been able to prove, that political considerations were increasingly influencing intelligence analysis and dissemination at the highest levels. It also highlighted the importance of congressional oversight and independent voices like Tulsi, who had the experience and platform to ask tough questions about intelligence community conduct. The contrast between her military service and commitment to transparency and Patel's political maneuvering and secrecy had been stark and powerful. For many Americans, the confrontation served as a wake-up call about the importance of accountability in intelligence agencies. The revelation that information about foreign election interference had been suppressed for political reasons struck at the heart of democratic governance and raised serious questions about how many other intelligence failures might be hidden from public view. The debate also demonstrated the power of documented evidence in political discourse. Tulsi's success hadn't come from rhetorical skill or personal attacks. It had come from methodically presenting official documents that exposed misconduct in Patel's own words. 3 months after the confrontation, Kash Patel had largely disappeared from public commentary on intelligence matters. His planned consulting firm focused on national security advice failed to attract clients. His speaking engagements dried up, and even conservative media outlets seemed reluctant to book him as an expert on intelligence issues. The intelligence analysts who had been retaliated against, meanwhile, were vindicated by congressional investigations that confirmed their accounts of political interference. Sarah Chun was reassigned to a position where she could use her expertise effectively, and new protections were put in place for intelligence community whistleblowers. Tulsi, meanwhile, had used the moment to build an even larger platform for intelligence community reform. Her methodical approach to exposing Patel's misconduct had demonstrated the kind of oversight capability that many believed was essential for maintaining democratic control over intelligence agencies. But perhaps the most important outcome was the broader conversation the confrontation had sparked about political interference in intelligence work. The documents Tulsi had presented weren't just evidence of individual misconduct. They had revealed systemic problems that required systematic solutions. The Pentagon Inspector General announced a comprehensive review of political interference in intelligence analysis. Congressional oversight committees strengthened their monitoring of intelligence community activities, and new protections were implemented for career analysts who raised concerns about political pressure. 6 months later, when intelligence historians looked back at this moment, they would identify it as a turning point. The night when the American public got a clear look at how political considerations were corrupting intelligence work, and when accountability advocates like Tulsi Gabbard demonstrated that sunlight really was the best disinfectant for government misconduct. The confrontation between Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel would be remembered not just as a political moment, but as a crucial example of why democratic oversight of intelligence agencies was essential. In exposing Patel's misconduct with his own documents and emails, Tulsi had reminded America that intelligence agencies serve the people, not partisan political interests. The lesson was simple but profound. In American intelligence, truth and transparency must triumph over political loyalty and secrecy. Kash Patel had learned that lesson the hard way, while Tulsi Gabbard had demonstrated its power in the most public way possible. As the story continued to ripple through American politics, one thing became clear. The age of unaccountable intelligence community leaders was coming to an end. The Patel documents had changed the rules of the game, And authentic oversight advocates like Tulsi were the ones best positioned to ensure that intelligence agencies served American democracy rather than partisan political interests. This wasn't just the story of a political confrontation. It was a reminder of what intelligence accountability could and should look like when conducted by people with the experience, integrity, and courage to ask tough questions and demand honest answers. It was the night Tulsi's documents changed everything.